The morning air outside the school felt cool and calm, but inside the building, life moved in its usual noisy rhythm. Students rushed through the hallways, lockers banged open and shut, and chatter floated from every direction. In the middle of all this was a quiet student who preferred walking slowly, keeping his head slightly down as he made his way toward the music room. He wasn't shy because he disliked people. He simply felt more at peace when the world wasn't demanding too much from him. He had always been different, not in a bad way, just quietly unique. He loved the sound of instruments more than the sound of conversations. While other kids talked about movies, video games, and what to do after school, he spent his time watching violin performances online. Sometimes he would even pause the videos at tiny moments so he could study exactly where the fingers should land, or how the bow should glide. Music didn't just interest him, it grounded him. He wasn't loud or demanding. He never tried to impress anyone in school. Instead, he showed up, did his work, and tried to stay unnoticed. But even then, some people still managed to make him the center of attention, and not in a good way. When he stepped into the orchestra room, he could already sense the tone of the day. The teacher stood by the front, flipping through sheet music with a look that suggested she was already tired, even though the first class had barely begun. Some of the students were warming up, others were pretending to warm up, and a few were whispering in the corner while eyeing him in a way he had grown used to. He took his usual seat near the back. He didn't choose this spot. It was given to him from the very first week of school. The teacher had said something about wanting to even out the sections, but he knew that wasn't the real reason. The truth was simple. She didn't think he belonged in a higher position. She didn't think someone like him could naturally be good at playing the violin. He carefully pulled his violin out of its case. It wasn't new. The varnish had tiny scratches, and the edges had a few chips from years of use. But to him, it was perfect. Every mark told a story from someone who played before him, and now he was adding his own. He tightened the bow, tuned his strings, and began lightly placing his fingers down to warm up. The sound was soft, barely above a whisper. But every note felt like a small reminder of why he continued to show up, despite the atmosphere around him. He wasn't the best player in the world, but he wasn't the worst either. He simply loved music. And sometimes love alone gives a person the strength to keep going. But the teachers didn't see that. They didn't see the hours he spent practicing at night, when everyone else in his building was asleep. They didn't see the effort he put into trying to understand pieces that were, according to the class syllabus, far above his level. All they saw was someone they assumed would struggle that day. As the class settled, a few students looked back at him with smirks. It wasn't the first time. They whispered things under their breath, nothing loud enough to be caught by the teacher, but clear enough for him to understand they weren't talking kindly. He didn't let it show on his face, though. He had mastered the art of silence. He lifted his bow, waiting for instructions like everyone else. The teacher clapped her hands together to get their attention. "All right, everyone. Today we're running through the new piece. I hope you all practiced because we don't have much time to get it ready for the performance next month." A few students groaned. Someone in the front joked that no one practiced anyway. The teacher forced a laugh, but her eyes drifted to the back of the room where he sat. Her expression tightened slightly. Just for a second, he pretended not to notice. As the class began playing, he did his best to follow along. The notes weren't overly complicated, but the class moved quickly, and he could feel the teacher watching him more than she watched anyone else. Every little slip, every tiny hesitation, seemed to make her inhale sharply or narrow her eyes. But the truth was, he wasn't actually struggling. He played cleanly, quietly, blending into the section without causing trouble. Even then, he could feel the weight of being silently picked apart. When the music finally stopped, the teacher began giving comments. Most of them were directed toward the class as a whole, but then she said, "Some of you need to be more aware of your timing, especially in the back row." A couple of students turned in their seats. He didn't. He kept his eyes on his music sheet. He knew the comment was meant for him. He also knew he hadn't made a timing mistake. Still, he didn't argue. Arguing only made things worse. He sat quietly and waited for the teacher to continue. The class moved on to the next section, but the uneasy feeling in his chest stayed. It always stayed. After class, as students packed up their things, he stayed behind for a moment, checking the bridge of his violin and making sure the strings hadn't loosened. He never rushed when it came to his instrument. Taking care of it was his way of taking care of himself. He looked around the room and saw the teacher speaking with a few students. They laughed about something. But the moment one of them glanced at him, the laughter softened, and the tone changed. He put his violin away and walked out of the room. The hallway felt a little too loud when he stepped into it again. He tightened the straps of his backpack and walked slowly, trying to blend into the movement around him. No one stopped him. No one called his name. In many ways, he was invisible to other students, but at the same time, the moments he was noticed were never the kind that made a person feel good. During lunch, he sat alone as usual. He ate quietly, pressing his headphones into his ears. Soft violin music filled his head, drowning out the cafeteria noise. He imagined himself playing the piece he heard. He imagined being on a stage, not for applause or attention, but for the simple joy of playing. When he finished eating, he placed his lunchbox back into his bag and looked at the time. Only a few minutes were left before the bell. He closed his eyes and kept listening to the music until the bell finally rang. His next classes went by like usual quietly, without problems, without anything remarkable. But as the day passed, he kept thinking about orchestra class. He replayed everything in his mind, the way the teacher looked at him, the way the students whispered, the comment about the timing. He wondered why things couldn't be simple. Why couldn't people just let him play in peace? Why was it so hard to be accepted when all he wanted to do was learn and get better? When the final bell rang, he walked home slowly, his violin case held close. His apartment wasn't far from the school, but the walk always felt longer after a rough day. He tried not to think too much. He tried to remind himself that as long as he kept practicing, none of the comments mattered. That belief carried him most days. When he reached home, he went straight to his small room. He placed his violin on the bed, sat on the edge, and took a deep breath. Then, without wasting time, he began to practice. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of his bow moving across the strings. Here, no one judged him. No one whispered. No one watched him with doubtful eyes. In this tiny room, he wasn't the student who was put at the back. He wasn't the kid some teachers underestimated. He was simply someone who loved music. Hours passed without him noticing. His fingers grew warm and flexible, his bow steady, his breath calm. The more he practiced, the more he felt the weight of the day slipping away. He didn't know that soon. Everything in his life was going to change. He didn't know that the same teachers who tried to make him feel small would one day be forced to see how wrong they were. He didn't know that his quiet love for music was leading him toward a moment that would silence every doubt for now. He just played softly, carefully, and full of heart, never imagining that one day these very notes would become legendary. The next morning arrived with the same routine, the same walk through the same noisy hallways, the same classrooms filled with chatter and movement. But something inside the quiet student felt heavier than usual. Yesterday's orchestra class kept replaying in his mind every comment, every stare. He tried to shake it off, but some feelings don't disappear that easily. Despite that, he kept reminding himself that today might be different. Maybe the teacher wouldn't focus on him as much. Maybe the class would go smoothly. Maybe he could just slip into the back row and blend with the rest of the violins without being noticed. But deep down, he knew that hoping didn't always make things happen. When he walked into the music room, the atmosphere felt a little different. Students were whispering more than usual, gathering near the front of the room in small circles. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but a few eyes turned toward him, and those same students quickly looked away. He hesitated a little before heading to his seat. He unpacked his violin carefully, like he always did, trying to stay calm. He tightened his bow, checked his strings, placed his music sheets in front of him. The teacher walked in a few minutes later, clapping her hands to silence the room. Her steps were brisk, almost impatient. and the way she glanced around made it clear she had something planned. "All right, everyone, settle down," she said, dropping a stack of papers onto her stand. "Today we're doing something different. I want to see where you all stand individually." A ripple of whispers spread across the room. Some students sounded annoyed, others confused. But the quiet student felt something else, a small twist in his stomach, warning him that this wasn't going to be a regular class. The teacher lifted her chin, scanning the rows. "We're doing solo run-throughs today, one by one. No excuses," few students groaned. Someone laughed nervously. But the quiet student sat frozen, gripping the neck of his violin just a little too tightly. He knew exactly what this meant. He knew who the teacher would call first. He knew this wasn't really about checking skills. It was about proving what she already believed. As the teacher walked toward the front row, she didn't call on the student sitting closest to her. Instead, she scanned the back, her eyes landing directly on him. "You," she said. "Why don't you go first?" The room fell completely silent. He felt every pair of eyes turned toward him. Some looked curious, others amused, a few even pitying. His heartbeat picked up, but he forced himself to stand. Arguing wouldn't help. Protesting would only make things worse. He walked slowly toward the front, his violin trembling slightly in his hand. The air felt heavier with every step, like he was walking into a space designed to expose him. When he reached the front, he stopped and looked at the music sheet the teacher had placed on the stand. It wasn't the simple class piece they had practiced yesterday. This one was harder, much harder. He knew instantly that she did this on purpose. "Take your time," the teacher said, but her tone didn't match her words. She stood with her arms crossed, waiting for him to fail. He took a breath, lifted his violin, and tried to steady his shaking fingers. The room was so quiet, he could hear someone tapping their shoe in the back. He placed his bow on the string and began. At first, his hands felt too stiff, and the notes came out uneven. A few students exchanged glances. The teacher raised an eyebrow, but he didn't stop. He closed his eyes for a moment. Let the sound of the violin fill his mind like it did in his room at home. He ignored the pressure. He ignored the silence. He ignored the expectation that he was about to embarrass himself. Slowly, the notes began to smooth out. His bow moved more confidently. His fingers landed with better precision. The melody started to come alive, but it still wasn't perfect. When he finished the first section, the teacher stepped forward. "Stop," she said abruptly. His heart dropped. "That's enough." She turned to the class. "This is why I always stress the importance of practicing. If you don't put in the work, it shows." The words hit him harder than the performance itself. He looked down at the floor, embarrassed. Even though he knew he had tried his best under pressure, the teacher didn't bother to hide her disappointment. "Sit down." He walked back to his seat, feeling smaller with every step. A few students avoided looking at him. One or two smirked quietly. No one offered a reassuring smile. He sat down, exhaling shakily. His hands trembled as he placed his violin back on his lap. The teacher moved on to the next student, someone from the front row. This student laughed with their friends before standing up, clearly unbothered. Their performance wasn't perfect, but the teacher complimented them anyway. "That's much better," she said. "See? Confidence makes a difference." The quiet student felt the words hit him again, this time sharper. The class continued one by one. Some students struggled, some did well, but none were spoken to the way he had been. None were judged as quickly or as harshly. By the time the last student performed, the room felt different. There was a strange mix of tension and relief in the air, as if everyone sensed something unfair had just happened, but didn't want to say it out loud when the bell finally rang. Students rushed to pack up their things. The quiet student stayed, seated a moment longer, staring at his violin case. He tried to swallow the lump in his throat, but it stayed. He began packing slowly, handling every piece of his instrument with the same care he always did. But today, the simple act of placing the violin in its case felt heavier. Students filed out of the room in groups. Their conversations floated around him, but he didn't listen. He kept his eyes down, trying to keep his expression still. He was about to leave when the teacher walked past him and said quietly, If you want to improve, you need to work harder. That piece wasn't complicated. She didn't wait for a response. She didn't offer help or guidance. She simply continued walking. He stood there, frozen. He knew the piece was complicated. He knew the teacher had set him up to struggle. But instead of getting angry, he only felt tired. He left the room without saying anything. The hallway outside felt dimmer somehow, even though the lights were bright. He walked slowly to his next class, trying to shake off the heaviness sitting in his chest, but the scene kept replaying in his mind: the silence of the room, the teacher's tone, the looks from the students. Every moment stung in a way he couldn't describe. At lunch, he sat alone again, headphones in. But this time, he didn't press play right away. He held his device in his hand, staring at the screen without really seeing it. He kept thinking, maybe I really am as bad as they think. But then another voice in his head whispered, no, you know you love this. You know how hard you work. One moment doesn't erase that. He finally pressed play, letting the soft notes of a violin fill his ears. The music lifted him slowly, like a hand reaching down to pull him out of the dark space he had fallen into. After school, walked home again, the same route as always. But today, his steps were slower. He felt drained, mentally and emotionally. When he reached home, he placed his bag on the bed and sat down for a moment. He looked at his violin case, unsure if he had the strength to practice. But after a few minutes, he reached for it anyway. He opened the case gently and lifted the violin. The familiar feel of it grounded him. It was the one place he didn't need permission to be good enough. He lifted the bow, took a slow breath, and began to play. The first few minutes were shaky. His hands still remembered the tension from earlier. But slowly, the music began to wash away the memory of the classroom. He played the same piece the teacher had forced him to perform, not to prove anything, but to reclaim it. He practiced section after section until every note felt natural, until the melody flowed easily, till he no longer felt judged. He didn't know how long he practiced. Time seemed to disappear. His room filled with warm sound, and little by little, the weight on his chest began to lift. He didn't know that this moment, this quiet determination to keep going, would be the start of something life-changing. He didn't know that soon. The same people who doubted him would witness something they never expected. For now, all he knew was that he wasn't giving up. Not today, not ever. The next few days passed quietly, and the student tried his best to focus on his work and stay out of attention. But inside, he felt a restlessness he couldn't explain. It was like something inside him had woken up after the solo incident in class. Something that made him want to prove something not to the teacher, not to the students, but to himself. At home, he kept practicing the difficult piece over and over again. Some nights he stayed up later than he should, moving the bow slowly across the strings, tightening every finger placement, correcting every small mistake. The music became more than just a hobby. It became a place for him to push out the frustration he had been carrying for so long. In school, he stayed quiet, but more people than before seemed to glance his way. Maybe they were waiting for the next time he would be put on the spot. Maybe they were thinking about how he looked that day in front of everyone. No one said anything directly to him, but he could sense the silent curiosity around him. The orchestra room felt the same as always, though. The teachers still watched him a little too closely, and the students still whispered among themselves. But he didn't let their looks bother him this time. He had a plan now. He had been practicing something on his own, something he knew no one expected. He wanted to be ready for whatever came next, and what came next happened sooner than he. On a Wednesday morning, the teacher walked into class with a clipboard in her hand. She looked unusually serious. After taking attendance, she cleared her throat and said, "We need to prepare for the school assembly next week. The administration wants the orchestra to perform something special." The room filled with murmurs. Assemblies were usually simple events. A performance meant more pressure. "We will be choosing one student to play a short solo introduction before the group piece begins," she continued. "It needs to be someone confident and capable." He felt the room shift. A few students started straightening in their seats. Others whispered names of who they thought might get picked. He didn't join them. He kept tuning his violin silently. The teacher scanned the rows. Her eyes moved past the front, the middle, and finally stopped at the back right on him. His heartbeat tightened. "Let's start by hearing a few of you play," she said. "Just a small section. I want to see who fits the tone we need." A few students looked nervous. Some nodded confidently. Then the teacher said, "You start." Of course she meant him. The room fell quiet again, the same heavy silence he had felt the week before. He stood slowly, his violin in hand. But this time, he didn't feel the same panic. His fingers felt steadier. His breathing was calmer. He walked to the front of the room, stopping at the same stand he had stood at before. "What piece would you like to show us?" the teacher asked, her voice carrying the same doubtful tone. He looked at the class. Every pair of eyes waited, expecting something simple, something they could judge quickly. "I'll play something I practiced at home," he said softly. The teacher raised an eyebrow. "Something you practiced at home? Is it school-level appropriate?" He nodded. "Yes." She didn't look convinced, but she stepped aside and gestured for him to begin. He lifted his violin. His bow touched the strings, and then he began. From the very first note, the room felt different. This wasn't the shaky, pressured sound he had produced during the forced solo. This time, the music came out warm, strong, steady. His bow glided across the strings with confidence he had never shown in class before. His fingers moved quickly, gracefully, landing on each note with precision. The melody he played wasn't simple. It wasn't something the class had learned. It was something far more complex, something he had chosen because it challenged him, pushed him, and made him feel alive when he played it. He had practiced it so many times at home that his body now moved through it without. Overthinking, the students stared. Some leaned forward, even the teachers. Expressions slowly changed from doubtful to surprised. As he played, the sound filled every corner of the room. The notes climbed, dipped, and carried emotion that words could not describe. It wasn't loud or flashy. It was pure and full of feeling. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. Every movement showed the hours of practice he had poured into mastering the song. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The whispers, the judgment, the frustration. It was just him and the music. Then he hit the final note and let it ring softly before lowering his bow. The silence afterward was different from any silence he had felt before. This one wasn't heavy or tense. It was stunned. No one spoke. No one moved. Even he didn't move at first. He simply stood there, breathing slowly, letting the moment sink in. Finally, someone in the middle row whispered, "That was good." Another student nodded, unable to look away. The teacher blinked, still processing what she had just heard. "Well," she said slowly, "that was unexpected." He didn't know if that was meant as a compliment or a comment, but he didn't dwell on it. "Take your seat," she said quietly. He walked back to his chair, feeling lighter than he had in months. The students watched him differently now, not with mockery or doubt, but with something closer to respect. But this moment wasn't the peak. It was only the beginning. After hearing a few other students play, the teacher dismissed the class. She didn't say who would be chosen for the assembly performance. She simply said, "We'll decide soon." But he already had a feeling something had shifted. When the bell rang, he packed his violin carefully, his hands now steady and confident. As he walked out of the classroom, a few students actually stepped aside to let him pass. One even said softly, "That was really good." He didn't know how to respond. So he just gave a small nod. He walked down the hallway, his violin case at his side, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: pride. But the day wasn't over. There was still more waiting for him. Later that afternoon, as he sat through another class, a messenger from the office entered and handed a slip to the teacher. The teacher looked at the paper, then called his name. "You need to go to the auditorium," she said. A few students whispered. He felt the same uncertainty rise in his chest, but he stood and walked out. The walk to the auditorium felt long. He didn't know why he was being called. Was it good news? Bad news? Something else entirely? When he entered, he saw the music teacher standing on stage, along with another man he hadn't seen before. Tall man wearing a visitor's badge and holding a small notebook. The music teacher waved him over. "Come here!" He climbed the steps, feeling confused. "This is the guest conductor visiting our school this week," she said. "He's listening to students who might play solos." The guest conductor gave a warm smile. "You must be the student who surprised everyone this morning?" The quiet student blinked, unsure how to answer. The conductor laughed softly. "That's a good thing, I promise." He relaxed a little. "Would you mind playing the piece again?" the conductor asked. He hesitated for just a second, then nodded. He lifted his violin once more, took a slow breath, and began playing. This time, the auditorium gave his sound even more room to bloom. The notes floated upward, echoing gently. It felt like the space understood him like. The walls were holding every sound with care. The conductor watched without blinking, his expression thoughtful and impressed. When the final note faded, the conductor let out a quiet exhale. "You have a gift," he said softly. He didn't know what to say. He felt warmth in his chest, the same kind he felt when practicing alone in his room. The teacher crossed her arms, clearly not expecting the conductor to react so strongly. "He still needs a lot of work," she said, "and his confidence in class is lacking." The conductor shook his head. "Confidence grows when talent is encouraged, and this student has something special." The teacher didn't respond. The conductor looked at the quiet student again. "If you're willing, I'd like you to play the opening solo at the assembly." For a moment, he couldn't process the words. Him? The opening solo. He nodded slowly, feeling speechless. The conductor smiled. "Good practice this afternoon. I want the school to hear what I heard today." The teacher still looked reluctant, but she nodded as well. He walked out of the auditorium with his violin case held close to his chest. His steps felt lighter, almost unreal. Everything that happened, the solo, the reactions, the conductor's praise felt like a dream, but it was real. Something had changed, and without even realizing it. He had taken the first step toward a moment that would soon become unforgettable, not just for him, but for everyone who had ever doubted him. The day after the violin performance, the school felt strangely quiet for him. It was the kind of quiet that doesn't come from silence, but from attention. People noticed him now, not in the loud or mocking way they had before, but in soft whispers, small looks, and hesitant smiles. When he stepped into the hallway, he felt it. It was like the air around him had changed. The same students who once snickered when he walked by now moved aside, giving him space as if they were unsure how to act. He didn't know if he liked it. He didn't know if this sudden shift made things easier or more confusing. For so long, he was used to slipping through doors, keeping his head down, and moving without being seen. Now he felt seen everywhere, but one thing didn't change. He still carried his violin case tightly in his hand. Not because he needed it every day, but because it made him feel grounded. It reminded him why he kept going. It reminded him that his music wasn't about the teachers who doubted him or the students who laughed. It was about something bigger, something that lived inside him. When he reached his classroom, he saw two boys who used to bother him all the time, standing near the door. They weren't saying anything rude, but the sight of them still made his stomach tighten. He braced himself quietly, preparing for whatever they might try. But when they looked up, their faces didn't hold the same sharp edges he remembered. Instead, they stepped aside awkwardly as if they didn't know how to face him now. One of them said, "Good job yesterday." He paused, surprised. It wasn't the kind of voice he was expecting. No laughter, no sarcasm. Just plain words. Real words. He gave a small nod, unsure how to respond, then walked inside. The day continued like that. More small moments, more unexpected kindness. Someone held the door for him. Someone else told him they liked the way he played. One girl said she cried during his performance, but then covered her face like she was embarrassed to admit it. He didn't know what to do with all of it. It felt strange to be treated with respect after being treated like a joke for so long. He didn't trust it fully yet, but he appreciated that things were changing. The teachers acted differently too. His homeroom teacher smiled at him when he handed in his assignment. His science teacher, who rarely looked up from the papers on her desk, suddenly asked how long he had been playing the violin. The music teacher, who had dismissed him before the performance, now offered him warm words, as if they had always believed in him. But he remembered how cold their voice had been before the show. He remembered every moment clearly. Still, he accepted the kindness without saying much. He wasn't the type to pretend things never happened, but he wasn't the type to hold grudges either. He simply wanted to keep playing, keep growing, keep proving to himself what he was capable of. After school, he walked home at his usual pace. The sun was setting, and the sky had turned soft shades of orange and pink. The breeze was cool, brushing lightly against his skin. He liked walking home during this time because it gave him space to think. He thought about the performance, the applause, the way the audience rose to their feet. He thought about how his hands trembled afterward, not from fear, but from relief. He reached his small home, opened the door, and stepped inside. The house smelled like warm bread, and he could hear the gentle hum of a fan running in another room. His mother looked up from the kitchen when she saw him. "There you are," she said, smiling softly. "How was school today?" He set his violin case down and shrugged a little. "Different." She raised an eyebrow, waiting for more. He told her how people stared at him in the hallways and how teachers who never noticed him suddenly spoke kindly. He didn't exaggerate or complain. He just explained. His mother listened quietly, nodding from time to time. "Sometimes," she said, "people only learn to appreciate others after they see something they didn't expect." He knew what she meant. He had shown them something they never thought he could do, something they never gave him a chance to show. And now, everything looked different even, though he felt the same inside. He went to his room and opened the violin case. He didn't need to practice right away, but he wanted to. Playing made him feel calm. It made him feel like the world was less confusing. He placed the violin gently under his chin and drew the bow across the strings. The sound was warm and familiar, like a voice he trusted. As he played, he let his thoughts drift. He pictured the faces in the audience the night of the performance. He remembered the lights on the stage and the way everything seemed to disappear the moment he played the first note. And he remembered the feeling that rose inside him, like the music was carrying him somewhere far beyond the problems of school and the whispers in the hallway. When he finished practicing, he set his violin aside and sat quietly on his bed. His room was small, but he didn't mind. The soft glow from the lamp made it feel peaceful. He leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes for a moment. Later that week, the school announced something unexpected. There would be a regional arts showcase, and they wanted him to represent the school. The message was delivered by the music teacher, who approached him in the hallway with a gentle smile. "We'd be honored if you performed," the teacher said. He was caught off guard. No one had ever used the word honored when talking about him before. He didn't answer right away. He thought about the stage, the audience, the pressure. He wasn't scared. He just wanted to make sure he was ready. After a moment, he nodded. "I'll do it." The teacher's smile widened. "Wonderful. We'll start preparing next week." When he walked away, something inside him felt bright, almost like a spark. This wasn't just another performance. It was an opportunity, a chance to show even more of what he had been hiding all these years. But he also knew it wouldn't be easy. People would expect more from him now. They would hope for something even better than before. And once again, he would have to face a room full of strangers. But he wasn't afraid anymore. He had already faced a crowd once and left them speechless. At home that evening, he told his mother about the showcase. She looked surprised but proud. "Another performance?" she asked. "That's wonderful," he smiled shyly. "I hope I can do well again." "You will," she said simply. "Because you play with honesty. People can feel that." He didn't know if he played with honesty. He just played because he needed to. Because music felt like breathing. But he appreciated her words. For the next few days, he practiced even more than usual. He tried different pieces, experimented with tone, and pushed himself to play with deeper feeling. Sometimes his mother would stand by the doorway and listen quietly. Sometimes neighbors from nearby houses would pause outside, because they could hear the music through the open window. Every day, his confidence grew little by little. Not because people were paying attention now, but because he was starting to believe in himself in a way he never had before. One afternoon, after finishing a long practice session, he stepped outside to take a break. The sun was warm, and the street was quiet except for the sound of birds. As he sat on the front steps, he thought about how much had changed in such a short time. He could feel himself standing on the edge of something new, something bigger than anything he had experienced yet. The showcase wasn't just going to be another event. It would be another turning point. Another moment that could change everything. He didn't know what would happen next, but he was ready for it. Ready to walk onto another stage. Ready to lift his bow again. Ready to show the world what his music truly meant. Because for the first time, he wasn't playing to prove anyone wrong. He was playing to show who he really was. The week of the showcase arrived faster than he expected. Each day leading up to it felt long and short at the same time, like time was stretching and shrinking around him. He practiced every evening after school, sometimes until the sky outside turned dark. His mother would check on him often, reminding him to take breaks, to drink water, to breathe, but she never stopped him from practicing. She knew how much it meant to him. The night before the showcase, he barely slept. He kept thinking about the stage, the lights, the audience filled with people he had never met. But this time, instead of fear sitting heavy in his chest, there was a warm sense of anticipation. Something inside him felt ready, like he had been preparing for this moment long before he ever stepped foot in that school. The morning of the event, he woke up early. He sat at the edge of his bed for a long moment, letting the quiet of the house settle around him. His violin case rested on his desk, closed but familiar. He looked at it and felt comfort wash over him. Whatever happened today, he knew that as long as he had his violin, he wouldn't feel alone. When he arrived at school, the bus was waiting outside to take the students chosen for the showcase. A few teachers greeted him with warm smiles. The students who were participating carried art projects, sketch notebooks, or poetry pieces. Everyone looked nervous, but there was also excitement in their eyes. He took a seat near the window. As the bus started moving, he watched the buildings blur past. His hands rested on the violin case in his lap, fingers tracing the edges gently. He didn't know what the day would bring, but he trusted himself more now than ever before. When they reached the venue, he felt his breath catch. The building looked huge, with tall glass windows and banners hanging outside announcing the event. Students from different schools walked in groups toward the entrance, some chatting excitedly, others silent with nerves. Inside, the hall was even more stunning. Warm lights filled the space, and rows of seats stretched far back. The stage itself looked taller than the one he had performed on at school. He swallowed, steadying himself. The music teacher approached him. "You're going to do great," they said softly. "Just play the way you always do," he nodded. He wasn't here to impress the teachers or the students from other schools. He was here to play. That was enough. As the event began, he sat backstage with the other performers. He listened as singers went on stage, as poets read their work, as dancers moved gracefully under the lights. Each performance was unique, filled with emotion. He admired their courage. Then it was his turn. The stage manager gave him a small nod. "You're next," they whispered. He stood up slowly, holding his violin. His palms felt warm, but his heartbeat was steady. He walked onto the stage, the lights bright against his face. He couldn't see the audience clearly, but he could feel them. He could sense hundreds of eyes watching. For a moment, he closed his own eyes. He breathed in and out. He let the quiet settle, and then he lifted his bow. The first note flowed into the air like a whisper. It was gentle, soft, almost fragile. But then the music grew, each note stronger, fuller, more alive. The room became still, as though everyone was holding their breath. His hands moved with confidence. His bow glided across the strings as if the music was guiding him rather than the other way around. Every sound carried emotion, joy, sadness, hope, strength. His heart poured into each note. He didn't think about the teachers who once doubted him. He didn't think about the students who laughed. He didn't think about fear or pressure. He only thought about the music, the one place where he felt understood, even when he didn't speak. The piece reached its final section, swelling with power. His fingers danced, his bow moved faster, and the notes rose higher. The sound filled every corner of the hall, reaching even the back rows. Then, with one final stroke, the piece ended. Silence, but only for a heartbeat. Then the applause came like a wave. People stood up, rows and rows. Their hands came together in loud, echoing claps. Some cheered. Some whistled. Some simply watched him with admiration in their eyes. He stared out at the crowd, stunned. He had expected polite applause at best. Maybe a few nods of approval, but this was something else entirely. This was a moment he knew he would never forget. As he walked off the stage, the music teacher met him backstage with tears in their eyes. "That was incredible," they said softly. "You didn't just play. You moved everyone out there." He didn't know what to say. Words felt small compared to what he felt inside. When they returned to school later that afternoon, the bus ride felt lighter. Students congratulated him. Some said they had never heard anything like it. Even the teachers spoke with genuine pride. But when he stepped off the bus and saw his mother waiting at the school entrance, everything inside him shifted. Her eyes shone with emotion as she hurried toward him. "How did it go?" she asked breathlessly. He opened the violin case to show her the certificate he had received. It wasn't just any certificate, it was an award of excellence, given only to the top performers of the entire showcase. Her hands flew to her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, look at you," she whispered. He smiled shyly. "I just played. That's all." She shook her head gently. "No, you shared a part of yourself. That's what made it special." They walked home together, and the evening sun cast a warm glow on the street. As they reached their house, he noticed a few neighbors standing outside. When they saw him, they applauded softly. Someone said, "We heard how well you did. Congratulations." He felt a warmth spread through his chest. Not the kind that came from applause or awards, but the kind that came from being truly seen for who he was and what he loved. Later that night, after dinner, he sat on his bed with the certificate resting beside him. The house was quiet, except for the faint sound of the fan in the hallway. He looked at his violin, thinking about the long journey that had brought him here. There were days when he almost gave up. Days when he felt invisible. Days when he felt pushed aside. Days when he wondered if his music even mattered. But now he understood something important. Music was never about proving anything to anyone. It was about expression. It was about emotion. It was about connection. And he had found that connection not just with the violin, but with the people who listened. A soft knock came at his door. His mother stepped inside and sat beside him. "You know," she said softly, "what happened today is only the beginning. You have a gift, and if you keep following it with honesty, you'll go much further than you can imagine." He looked at his violin and smiled. "I want to keep playing. I want to get better." "Oh, and you will," she replied. A peaceful silence settled between them. After a moment, she stood up and kissed the top of his head. "Good night," she whispered before leaving the room. He lay back on his bed and stared at the ceiling. His body felt tired, but his heart felt full. He closed his eyes and imagined future stages, future audiences, future songs he hadn't even learned yet. The world felt big, but for the first time. It didn't feel scary. He knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, doubts, obstacles. But he also knew something else, something stronger. He knew he was capable. He knew he was growing. He knew he had something worth sharing. And as he drifted off to sleep, one last thought stayed with him, warm and steady. This time, the world wasn't trying to silence him. It was listening.